From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The middle class finds itself in this situation today. It's not inevitable. A lot of the economists and a lot of these experts and a lot of politicians will say, well, this is just inevitable. It's the global economy. That's this natural force out there, and everybody's helpless to control it. We reject that. We say that's not true. Policies were put in place that have caused these things to happen or allowed them to happen. And similarly, policies could be put in place that can change that.
The betrayal of the American dream. The famed Pulitzer Prize reporting team of Donald Bartlett and Jim Steele published a follow-up to their landmark America, What Went Wrong. We'll speak with them for the hour on the assault on the middle class, the cost of free trade, the great tax heist, deregulation, and the end of retirement.
What is happening is not related to the recession. Yes, it's kind of focused on it, but the downward incline is going to continue after the recession is over.
Don Bartlett and Jim Steele will also look at how corporations like Apple and Boeing took the money and jobs and ran to China. Apple doesn't manufacture a single product in the United States. And how, as head of the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City, Mitt Romney helped raid the federal treasury. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The United Nations failed to meet a deadline Friday for the first-ever global agreement regulating the arms trade. Hopes had been raised for a last-minute deal, but the negotiations collapsed without the required consensus. Arms control advocates heavily criticized the Obama administration, which demanded a number of exemptions and ultimately said it needed more time to review the proposals. White House officials had cited the need to protect Second Amendment rights in the United States, despite UN assurances the treaty text would not interfere. In a statement, Amnesty International USA said the U.S. had shown stunning cowardice, adding, quote, "It's a staggering abdication of leadership by the world's largest exporter of conventional weapons to pull the plug on the talks just as they were nearing an historic breakthrough." The U.S. is now under new pressure to revive the talks to reach a deal before the UN General Assembly this fall. Amrit MacDonald of Oxfam said enough progress has been made to fuel hopes for an eventual agreement.
It goes without saying the increased use of heavy weapons, tanks, attack helicopters, and reportedly in some cases even jet fighters in urban areas has already caused many civilian casualties and puts many more at grave risk. Taking all this together with the reported build-up of forces in and around Aleppo, we believe this bodes very ill for the people of that city.
As the talks collapsed at the United Nations, a top State Department official openly bragged U.S. government efforts have helped boost foreign military sales to record levels this year. Speaking to a group of military reporters, Andrew Shapiro, the Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, said, quote, "We've really upped our game in terms of advocating on behalf of U.S. companies. I've got the frequent flyer miles to prove it." According to Shapiro, U.S. arms sales have already topped $50 billion in fiscal 2012, putting the U.S. on pace to increase its total for the year by 70%. At least 7 people have been killed in a U.S. drone strike in the Pakistani area of North Waziristan. As in previous strikes, Pakistani officials say the victims were militants, but the Obama administration's policy is to deem all adult male drone targets as militants unless exculpatory evidence is found after their deaths. The strike comes just as the head of Pakistan's intelligence service, Lieutenant General Zahir-ul-Islam, is preparing to visit Washington for talks later this week. Relief officials, meanwhile, are warning some 240,000 Pakistani children are now at risk after local Taliban warlords banned polio vaccination in both North and South Waziristan. The Taliban called the move a response to the ongoing drone attacks and the potential for espionage under the cover of immunization, citing the CIA-backed fake vaccination program that helped locate Osama bin Laden. Pakistan is one of 3 countries in the world where polio remains a large-scale risk. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney continued a foreign trip over the weekend with a visit to Israel. Romney's campaign drew headlines after a top aide initially announced Sunday Romney would announce his support for a preemptive Israeli military attack on Iran should Israel deem it necessary to stop Iran's alleged nuclear activities. But after taking the stage for a speech Sunday night, Romney backed off from the stance, stopping short of declaring his support for a unilateral strike. Instead, Romney echoed President Obama's long-stated position to leave all options on the table.
We should employ any and all measures to dissuade the Iranian regime from its nuclear course. And it is our fervent hope that diplomatic and economic measures will do so. In the final analysis, of course, no option should be excluded. We recognize Israel's right to defend itself and that it is right for America to stand with you.
As Romney headed to Israel, President Obama took new steps to display his support for Israeli government policies. On Friday, Obama announced a new measure to increase military aid to Israel. Speaking to reporters, Obama correctly said the aid was worth $70 million, but then apparently thinking he'd made a mistake, stopped himself to wrongly claim the aid was in fact worth $70 billion.
I have made it a top priority for my administration to deepen cooperation with Israel across the whole spectrum of security issues, intelligence, military, technology, and in many ways what this legislation does is bring together all the outstanding cooperation that we have seen really at an unprecedented level between our two countries to underscore our unshakable commitment to Israel's security. I'm also very pleased that this week we are going to be able to announce $70 million in additional spending, $70 billion, in additional spending for Iron Dome.
The White House also took new steps to back the Israeli government's position on bombing Iran. Citing a U.S. official, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported Sunday President Obama's national security advisor, Thomas Donnellan, had personally briefed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on contingency plans to bomb Iran should the U.S. decide to abandon the diplomatic track on Iran's nuclear program. The Israeli government has denied the report. A pregnant shooting victim who sustained serious injuries in the Aurora massacre in Colorado has lost her young daughter in the attack, has suffered a miscarriage. Ashley Moser was 8 weeks pregnant when she miscarried from the trauma of the shooting while undergoing treatment in the hospital. Her 6-year-old daughter Veronica was the youngest victim to be killed in the attack. The suspect in the case, James Holmes, is due to make his second court appearance today. Holmes' public defender has made court filings showing he had been receiving psychiatric treatment before the shooting occurred. Police in Maryland, meanwhile, say they may have prevented another shooting with the arrest of a man who made violent threats and was found to have a large stockpile of weapons. The suspect, Neil Prescott, had reportedly called his workplace and made threats referring to himself as a joker, just as James Holmes had allegedly called himself upon his arrest in Aurora. Maryland police and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms officials described the raid on Prescott's home.
He made significant threats to coming back and harming people at the business. In fact, he said, I'm a joker, and I'm going to load my guns and blow everyone up. That initiated a 36-hour investigation that culminated early this morning.
We had several agents out there right on the scene. They evaluated the evidence. They recovered approximately 25 firearms, several thousand rounds of ammunition. The firearms are further described as semi-automatic rifles, semi-automatic pistols.
The Canadian oil company Enbridge has sustained another leak to one of its oil pipelines in the United States. A major pipeline for Canadian light crude spilled more than 1,000 barrels of oil in Wisconsin Friday, forcing the company to shut it down. The leak came nearly 2 years to the day after Enbridge's oil spill in the Kalamazoo River, the most expensive onshore spill in U.S. history. The FBI is being accused of targeting political activists in the northwestern United States. At least 3 homes have been raided in Portland, and grand jury subpoenas have also been handed out in Seattle and Olympia against people linked to Occupy and anarchist-related groups. A spokesperson for a group calling itself the Committee Against Political Repression said people are being targeted for their ideological beliefs.
People are being targeted based on their political beliefs, and we know this because specifically in the search warrant, they're listing anarchist literature, black clothes, and computers.
Arrests have been made so far. The FBI has said only the raids were conducted as part of an investigation of violent crime. The grand jury in Seattle is expected to convene later this week. Police in Burlington, Vermont are being accused of firing bullets at activists protesting a meeting of New England governors and Eastern Canadian premiers. On Sunday, police said they took action after a group of protesters tried to block a bus picking up conference delegates. Video footage posted online shows police shooting at least one protester at close range. Thousands of people rallied on Capitol Hill on Saturday to protest the gas drilling process known as fracking. Organizers of the Stop the Frack Attack rally say they brought together members of communities across the country whose lives are being adversely impacted by the environmental damage of hydraulic fracturing. The rally culminated in a march to the offices of America's Natural Gas Alliance and the American Petroleum Institute. Police in London are being accused of political repression and mass arrests of cyclists during the Olympics opening ceremony. On Friday, at least 132 people on bicycles were detained while taking part in a critical mass. The cyclists say they were kettled by police and held overnight. One of those arrested was 13 years old. In Japan, thousands of people broke through police barriers to march on Parliament Sunday night in a massive protest against nuclear power. Japan's seen its largest anti-nuclear protest to date after bringing a shuttered plant back online for the first time since last year's Fukushima disaster. And in Syria, clashes continue to rage between government and rebel forces in Aleppo. Both sides have offered conflicting accounts of how much they're in control of the city. At the United Nations, Rupert Colville of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights warned civilians that Aleppo are under siege.
It goes without saying the increased use of heavy weapons, tanks, attack helicopters, and reportedly in some cases even jet fighters in urban areas has already caused many civilian casualties and puts many more at grave risk. Taking all this together with the reported build-up of forces in and around Aleppo, we believe this bodes very ill for the people of that city.
Those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.